find variety of movement and vary your posture, because your posture is never static.
Welcome back to another episode of the Optimal Body Podcast. I'm Dr. Dom.
I'm DocJen.
And today we're going to be talking about 5 things that you should start to care about as you age in your health and in your movement. Let's get to it. All right, so before we dive in on these 5 tips, I'm going to ask everyone out there to please subscribe and hit the notification bell, because we come out with so many of these topics on PT Pearls, and Jen has a ton of videos that she comes out with on movement and pain related issues that are immensely going to help your body out. So please also comment below if there's anything that you're learning or future topics that you want us to do videos on. All right, let's get into the 5 topics that you should start caring about in your health as you age.
5 things relatively quickly so we don't take up too much of your time. But really, it's so important as our body ages to start to pay attention to these little things. It doesn't have to be so time consuming and overwhelming if we just start to think small. How do we build the foundation of these 5 things in order for us to carry on and start to age as gracefully as possible in the way that we feel, move, and function?
Yeah, because it can be really such little things. It's things that we probably already do throughout the day where we, with a little bit of added awareness, could work on most of these.
Yeah.
Right? Without really necessarily adding anything extra in. It's just being a little bit more aware during certain aspects of our day. And that brings us to our first tip, which is our feet.
Yeah.
We really, really need to start paying attention to our feet, because for our first 30, 40, 50 years of life or more, especially as we're in school, as we're in athletics potentially, and then in the workforce, we're not really paying attention to what we're doing with our feet. We cram them in our shoes, we cram them in our athletic footwear, especially if we're working in an office, our dress shoes, or when we're going out or going to weddings, we're putting them in our fancy high heels, or as uncomfortable as all get out, dress shoes that I can't even put on my feet anymore.
I know. Relying on these external things like orthotics that are going to do all the work for us, they're really not. They can be supportive in certain situations when necessary and when needed. They can help us to address pains and symptoms and different things as we are in that time period. But otherwise, outside of that, you have the ability, no matter what age, to start to address your feet. And one of the best examples I have is using my mom, because for as long as I can remember, we were told, find the shoes with arch support. They have to have good arch support. And that's what I was always taught growing up. And that's what we were looking for. So I know that's the type of shoes that my mom put her foot in for 60 years. Most of those shoes are aesthetically pleasing. They're having more of a narrow toe box, so they're squeezing our toes and we don't have the ability to move our feet. Even if we weren't going to change our shoes right away, even if you just started with that sock trick that I talk about all the time, where you're interlacing your socks between your toes, even if we just started there and you did that for 10 minutes a night, and then maybe you can start to tap into those Vivo barefoot shoes every once in a while that we talk about. But starting to address your feet health, no matter what age you're at, is going to be really crucial. And this helps us to build not only the strength, but our proprioception. So like you said, mentioning balance. Balance is so incredibly important as we age.
Balance, and then again, that baseline mobility. So Jen mentioned the sock trick, but if you can't look down at your feet and actively get your toes to move and separate a little bit, or maybe try and lift your big toe while your other 4 toes are sitting still, and then do the opposite, lift your other 4 toes, and while your big toe kind of remains still, that means we've really lost a lot of that motor connection from our brain to foot. The more arch support you have in your shoe, the less your foot needs to support the arch itself. So your muscles are just going to continue to forget how to do that support themselves. Same with something with a big cushion, so that you're not having a heavy heel strike. The fat pads that our feet so beautifully already have in them will continue to just degrade and
we won't need them.
Atrophy or go away, because we won't need them. Our shoe is doing that for us. So again, the more that we can just get barefoot and not be wearing anything around the house, the more we'll start to get our feet used to that natural mobility we need in the toes, the arch support that we need in the arch, and doing slight heel strikes so that our fat pads can start to revive themselves and do what they're meant to do. I
think there's a lot of fear in what our spine might look like as we age. And we've talked about this on previous podcasts, but I think it's always important to mention and remember that our spine will change and it will adapt to, especially to the postures that we're continuously being put in over time. But it's just like the inside structures of our spine are going to age like the outside structures of our face, of our hands, of our skin. And if we see wrinkles as normal, this is part of aging, skin starts to sag, that's part of aging. Well, why can't we look at what happens on images as part of aging rather than being afraid of it and fearing it or putting so much stress around it?
People without symptoms that are 50-plus-year-old, you're going to have the majority of them showing some degree of disc degeneration, or a high percentage of them showing some degree of disc herniation or changes in their upper spine. You'll have a lot of providers saying like, oh, well, your upper spine is straightening out, like we need to get that fixed, or you're never going to feel the same again. And where it is important to understand what might be going on internally, it's not worth it to fear that.
Yes.
Because like we just said, there are tons of asymptomatic people that don't have pain, that are walking around that likely have similar images to you. So what can we do to make you one of the asymptomatic ones?
Exactly. Oh yeah, I'm getting older. And one thing that Dom and I really truly believe in is continuing to find variety of movement and vary your posture, because your posture is never static. So especially when someone's taking an image of you statically standing, that is a snapshot in a moment, but that is not your everyday posture.
The goal should be, okay, how can we be standing or holding our body in one posture for as little amount of time as possible?
Yeah, really.
Because really, another thing Jen and I love to say is the best posture is the next posture. And if I'm having symptoms in my upper back and neck, how can I keep that upper back and neck moving? How can I move it into positions that, I'm not usually in? If I tend to work at a computer and then drive home and then sit and watch TV, how can I find ways to move out of that and be in a variety of open positions where my chest tends to be open, where my neck tends to be looking up and, chin tucked with neck back a little bit more so than neck forward and chin out? How can you reverse those tendencies and behaviors that you tend to exhibit?
There's no one perfect exercise for your neck straightening out, or the hump that's starting to develop, or your spine that you're starting to see degenerative changes. It's truly about continuing to find different ways to move.
Number 3 is talking more about our tissue tolerance and how we can really prep our tissues for strengthening. Because as we age, and here's another thing that I can agree with in the majority of people, but I don't know if it needs to be a normal thing. I think it could be seen as more of a common thing. We talk about sarcopenia, or this loss of body mass, but then we also see examples of people who start strength training at 50 and absolutely gain muscle mass in their later years. So that's where I think sarcopenia is another one of those more common, doesn't have to be normal type of things for me, where if you start strength training, in your later years, you can definitely gain strength, and you don't have to continue to have this degradation of your muscle until inevitable death. But how do we prep those tissues? Because especially if strength training and resistance training isn't something that we're used to, then we might start to load our body and our muscles and start getting joint pains.
Do I have, looking at my thighs, right? Thighs tend to be really tight on a lot of people. Your quads. And so what does it feel like if I start to compress my quads? Can I even touch them? Some people touch is super sensitive, or starting to put pressures into them. We don't need to dig into areas. We're not breaking anything up. We've talked about that before, but we do want to start to reprogram our tissue tolerance and our pliability within our tissue, because that's going to help us get more length and mobility. And then with more length and mobility, we're going to be able to strength train through bigger ranges without affecting our joints or putting too much pressure on our joints. We're going to be able to use those muscles more effectively. That's where I do think it's healthy to foam roll. I do think it's healthy to use tools like Tune Up Fitness, Jill Miller's tools of the balls and everything. I do think it's effective to feel the body, get massages. I think that is a part of building that tissue tolerance before we start strength training.
And as soon as you start losing the ability to stand up out of a chair or stand up off a toilet or go up and down stairs, that's when we really start to lose important function that's going to help us thrive in life and in society. So being able to prep those tissues to then get into strength work or strength training, so important.
And then number 4, we have to look at our baseline, and that's always coming back to our mobility. And I was like coined the mobility queen early on in social media days because that's what people saw the most of me. But it is something
which makes me the mobility king.
Oh, yeah.
Mobility king. Nothing to do with my mobility.
Kind of like what we talked on last podcast, right? Down regulating so I can increase my mobility and address this mobility in order to be able to strength train. It's both. Like it's not one or the other. It's both. And that can feel overwhelming, but it doesn't have to, especially if we program it in little bits. It only has to take 5 to 10 minutes a day. And if we start to do that smart and consistently, that's what's going to make the biggest change.
Mobility is so vital as the precursor to then strength training and then getting into functional things like walking up and down stairs controlled, standing on one leg, things like that. You kind of already tapped into what number 5 is going to be, which is managing stress.
So big.
So important, and something that in many aspects, people will go through entire days without slowing down, bringing some awareness to the events of the days, understanding what is adding more heightened sympathetic input into our life, and understanding how we can put a few more things into our life that help us downregulate and focus on that parasympathetic rest, recover, relax, digest system. That's all things like breath work is the biggest one that we go to, and focusing on how to use our breath to control that nervous system input, where even if during the busiest and most chaotic portions of our day, we can pause for 30 seconds and take 3 breaths that are a 2 inhale and 6 or 7 second exhale with a short pause at the bottom, and then continue into your day.
When we're saying managing stress, we usually want to talk about managing chronic stress, managing that stress overload that we're feeling like it's consuming us, it's becoming overwhelming, right? That's when we want to start to say, okay, how can I take those moments where I'm bringing in that down regulation practice? But also know that stress in terms of exercise, really important. We need those higher stressors that are going to impact and create stress in our body so that we have both aspects. It's my body manually. Here's how I find this stressor, and here's how I lean into stress. Good stress, the healthy stress, which is the working out and the overload in that sense. And then I can find the down regulation. I can find that low impact, that breathing, that reset that really drops me back into just presence within the body. If I can find that spectrum manually without allowing my body to do it on automatic and just take over all the time and feel that anxiety and stress all the time, that is so good for brain health. That's so good for our physiology. That's so good for just all of our systems, literally all of our systems, our lymphatic drainage, our circulatory system, so much. And I've talked to women who are well into menopause, and they've said the only thing that's worked for them is actually starting to get sleep. So focusing on down regulation and then focusing on strength training. So getting both aspects in their life is the only thing that's really managing a lot of those symptoms that come.
To recap on the 5 points that we brought up, let's see if I can do them. We got our feet, paying attention to our feet and our foundation. Number 2 was our spinal health. The best position is the next position. Then we have tissue tolerance and tissue prepping to be able to strength train. Mobility, how important mobility is as that foundation to get back into strength training and all sorts of other functional positions. And then number 5 is stress, bringing more awareness to what stressors we have in our day and how to stay balanced, how to see the full spectrum of stress in our lives. And we bring up these 5 specific tips because we address all of these in this month's Grateful for My Body challenge coming up. It starts in November. We're going through a full 30-day challenge with a whole massive group of people who are going to be going through all of these down regulatory activities, breath work, foot mobility, the active and the passive mobility, tissue tolerance, teaching us how to become more aware of that stress. so much that is going to go on and get packed into this month that's just going to help you fill up and bring yourself some love in your body.
I mean, it's more of that down regulation. It's more of that rest recovery before we get into the higher stress impact strength training, right? So this month is really meant to help prep you. It's really meant to set the foundation. And that's what we hope to be doing all together as a huge community, so you can get back and feel good with strength training, get back and feel good with starting to do hits again without having pain, without having injury, and with really truly being able to heal the body and set that foundation before you build. Thank you so much for joining us on another episode. I hope that helped to bring awareness and just what we should start paying attention to as we age. If you have more questions or specifics on anything that we mentioned, please drop it in the comments below. Maybe we can expand across a topic that you don't quite understand or you have more questions about. Drop them below and subscribe so you don't miss out on any future podcasts and information that we have coming out in the future.